The doctor's words fell like stones into still water. "You'll never bear children, Miss Hartwell." In 1878, Silver Ridge, Colorado, that sentence didn't just close a door. It locked Eliza out of every future she'd imagined. Within days, the whispers started. Within weeks, marriage proposals dried up like creek beds in August. The school teacher who once drew admiring glances now collected only pitying stares. But when a quiet cowboy with unreadable eyes asked her to teach him to read, neither of them knew they were about to rewrite everything the town thought was certain. Watch until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far Eliza's story travels. The examination room smelled of carbolic acid and old leather. Eliza Hartwell sat perfectly still on the edge of the wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight despite the trembling that wanted to claim her. Dr. Whitmore stood with his back to her, washing his hands in the basin with methodical precision, the water splashing against porcelain, the only sound in the suffocating silence. She had come seeking answers for the persistent pain that had plagued her for months. She left carrying a verdict that would reshape her entire existence. "Miss Hartwell?" Dr. Whitmore dried his hands on a clean towel, his movements slow, deliberate. He was a kind man, she'd always thought. In his 50s, with silver threading through his dark beard, he had delivered half the babies in Silver Ridge and set more broken bones than anyone could count. But kindness, she was learning, couldn't soften certain truths. "I want you to understand what I'm telling you." "I understand." Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "The scarring is extensive. The fever you survived 2 years ago, it did more damage than we realized at the time." He sat down across from her, his eyes gentle but unflinching. "You will never conceive a child. I'm sorry, I wish I had different news." The words hung in the air between them, solid and immovable as mountain stone. Never. Such a complete word. Such a final word. Eliza nodded once. "Thank you for your honesty, doctor. There are other ways to build a meaningful life." "I understand," she repeated, standing. Her legs felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. "What do I owe you?" He waved the question away. "Consider it settled. Miss Hartwell, if you need someone to talk to, I'll be fine. Thank you." She walked out of his office with her head high and her heart breaking quietly inside her chest, where no one could see. The afternoon sun hit her face like an accusation. Silver Ridge spread out before her in all its rough-edged glory, false-fronted buildings lining the main street, the mountains rising sharp and indifferent beyond. The town had grown quickly since silver was found in the nearby hills 5 years ago. Nearly 800 people now called it home, though that number swelled when the miners came down from the camps. Eliza had been here for 3 years, teaching children their letters and numbers in the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. She'd built a life here, made friends, attended church socials and town meetings. Let herself imagine a future that looked like the futures of other women her age. Marriage, children, a home filled with noise and love, and the beautiful chaos of family. That future had just been declared impossible. She walked toward her small house on Maple Street, barely seeing the people she passed. Mrs. Carson nodded from her porch. Tom Brennan tipped his hat. Everything looked exactly as it had this morning when she'd left for her appointment. The whole world looked the same. Only she had changed. By evening, the whispers had already started. Eliza heard them 3 days later while buying supplies at Henderson's general store. She'd come in for lamp oil and thread, her shopping list simple and practical. Margaret Henderson stood behind the counter, weighing out flour for Mrs. Pritchard, and the two women's voices carried clearly in the confined space. "Such a shame," Mrs. Pritchard was saying, her tone dripping with sympathy that felt more like satisfaction. "So young, and already her future decided." "Dr. Whitmore shouldn't have been so quick to share private medical information," Margaret replied, but her voice held curiosity rather than censure. "Oh, he didn't tell me directly, but his nurse mentioned it to Sarah Collins, who told her sister, and, well, you know how these things spread. That poor girl will never marry now." "You don't know that." "Don't I? What man wants a wife who can't give him children? Especially out here where every hand is needed. It's practical, not cruel." Eliza stood frozen between the pickle barrel and the shelf of canned goods, the lamp oil forgotten in her hand. She should announce herself. should step around the corner and end this conversation with her presence, but her feet wouldn't move. "She's a fine teacher," Margaret offered. "Oh, certainly, but teaching other women's children isn't the same as having your own, is it? I do feel for her. Though I suppose it's better she knows now than to disappoint some poor man after marriage." The words landed like physical blows. Eliza set the lamp oil down carefully, afraid her shaking hands would drop it. She turned and walked out of the store as quietly as she'd entered, her shopping abandoned. The November air bit through her wool coat. She walked without destination, her feet carrying her down familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. Past the church where she'd attended services every Sunday. Past the schoolhouse where she'd devoted 3 years to shaping young minds. Past the homes of families she'd shared meals with, whose children she'd taught to read. Everything looked different now, seen through the lens of what she'd just learned about herself. Or rather, what she'd learned about how she would be seen. Not as Eliza Hartwell, schoolteacher in person. As Eliza Hartwell, the woman who couldn't have children. The woman whose value had just been publicly measured and found wanting. She found herself at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with early snow. A creek ran nearby, its water clear and cold and indifferent to human sorrow. Eliza sat on a fallen log and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The grief came in waves. Grief for the children she would never carry. Grief for the future she'd imagined in idle moments. A husband's hand on her swelling belly. A baby's first cry. The weight of an infant in her arms. Grief for the normalcy she would never have. The unquestioned place in society that came with being a mother. But beneath the grief lay something sharper. Rage. Rage at the doctor who couldn't keep confidence. Rage at the women who'd turned her private pain into public entertainment. Rage at a world that reduced her worth to her ability to bear children, as if she were livestock being evaluated for breeding potential. She was 24 years old. She could read Latin and Greek. She'd kept the school's accounts balanced to the penny for 3 years. She'd taught 47 children to read and write and cipher. She'd organized the church library and led the Ladies' Literary Society, and helped birth 3 babies when Dr. Whitmore couldn't reach the mothers in time. But none of that mattered, apparently, not in the face of her barrenness. The sun was setting when she finally walked home. Her small house sat dark and empty, just as she'd left it. 1 bedroom, 1 main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area, a small washroom out back. Simple, clean, hers. Also lonely, she acknowledged for the first time. She'd been content with solitude before. Now it felt like a preview of her future, years stretching ahead with only herself for company. She lit the lamps and built up the fire in the stove, going through the motions of normalcy. Made herself tea she didn't want. Sat at her small table with a book she couldn't focus on. The silence pressed in from all sides. The knock came just after dark. Eliza opened the door to find Sarah Mitchell on her porch, a covered dish in her hands and concern in her eyes. Sarah taught at the school with her, handling the younger children while Eliza worked with the older students. "I heard," Sarah said simply. "I brought stew. May I come in?" Eliza stepped aside, grateful and resentful in equal measure. She didn't want pity, but she desperately didn't want to be alone. Sarah set the dish on the table and turned to face her. "How are you?" "How do you think?" "I think you're probably furious that your private business is now town gossip. I think you're hurt and scared and trying to figure out how to face everyone tomorrow. I think you're wondering if anything will ever feel normal again." Eliza's eyes burned. "Yes, all of that." Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down, then gestured for Eliza to do the same. "My sister couldn't have children either, back in Ohio. Everyone knew, everyone whispered. She thought her life was over at 26. What happened to her? She married a widower with 3 children who needed a mother. She raised those children as her own and loved them fiercely. When I left for Colorado, those children, grown now, called her mama, and meant it with their whole hearts. She told me once that she'd stopped mourning what she couldn't have once she started loving what she did have." "That's a nice story," Eliza said quietly. "But I don't have 3 children who need a mother. I have a town that's already decided I'm no longer marriage material." "Then prove them wrong." "How?" Sarah reached across the table and gripped Eliza's hand. by living, by teaching, by refusing to diminish yourself to match their small-minded expectations. You're still you, Eliza. You're still the smartest woman in this town, the most patient teacher, the best friend I've had in years. Don't let them take that from you. Eliza wanted to believe her. She wanted to feel the defiant strength Sarah's words were trying to kindle, but all she felt was tired. I should go, Sarah said eventually. But I mean what I said. You're not diminished by this. Not unless you choose to be. After Sarah left, Eliza ate stew she barely tasted and tried to imagine a future that didn't look like slow erasure. She failed. The next Sunday, the weight of scrutiny pressed down on her like physical force. She felt every glance, every whisper, every moment of speculation disguised as concern. The women who'd always greeted her warmly now offered smiles tinged with pity. The men who'd once been friendly now seemed awkward, as if they didn't know how to talk to a woman whose purpose had been publicly revoked. She held her head high and said nothing. Monday morning, she returned to the schoolhouse and taught her students with the same dedication she'd always shown. The children didn't know, didn't care. They wanted to learn their letters and numbers, wanted praise for good work and gentle correction when they struggled. With them, she could still be just herself. But when parents came to collect their children at day's end, Eliza saw the change, the careful distance, the speculative looks, as if barrenness might be contagious. Mrs. Bradley lingered after collecting her son. Miss Hartwell, I want you to know we still think you're a wonderful teacher. Still, as if there was any question. Thank you, Mrs. Bradley. It's just, well, I do hope this doesn't affect your ability to understand the children, now that you won't be having any of your own. The words were spoken with apparent kindness, but they landed like stones, as if childlessness somehow removed her ability to teach, to care, to understand young minds. I assure you, Eliza said quietly, my dedication to your children's education remains unchanged. Mrs. Bradley smiled, patted Eliza's arm, and left. The pity in her eyes burned worse than anger would have. 3 weeks passed. The whispers gradually subsided, replaced by something worse, careful politeness that kept her at arm's length. Invitations to social gatherings dried up. Women who'd once sought her company for quilting circles and book discussions now made excuses. She was being gently, quietly erased from the social fabric of the town. The annual Harvest Festival arrived in late November, just before the heavy snows would close the mountain passes and lock Silver Ridge in for winter. The whole town turned out for the celebration, tables laden with food, music from a traveling fiddle player, children racing between the adults' legs while their parents laughed and danced. Eliza almost didn't go. The thought of facing all those carefully kind faces, all that gentle distance, made her want to stay home with her books and her solitude. But staying home felt like surrender, like accepting the diminished version of herself that the town had decided she should be. So she went. She wore her best dress, dark green wool with black trim, practical but well made, and pinned her dark hair up carefully. If she was going to face scrutiny, she would do it looking like someone who hadn't been broken by gossip and pity. The festival was held in the cleared area behind the church, where someone had built a temporary platform for dancing. Torches and lanterns provided light as the November darkness fell early. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air, and the fiddle player was working through a lively reel that had several couples spinning across the makeshift dance floor. Eliza moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting people politely, accepting their careful kindness with grace she didn't feel. She helped serve food, complimented Mrs. Henderson's pie, and made conversation about the coming winter and the school's upcoming Christmas program. All perfectly normal, all perfectly exhausting. She was standing near one of the food tables, taking a moment of quiet when she saw him. He stood at the edge of the crowd, not quite part of the celebration, but not separate from it either. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wore work clothes, denim pants, a flannel shirt, a leather vest, and held his hat in his hands. She'd never seen him before. She was certain of that. In a town this size, strangers stood out. He was watching the dancing, but his attention seemed distant, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. There was something in his stillness that caught her attention, a quality of calm that felt earned rather than natural, as if he'd learned to be still the way some men learn to be quick. "That's Caleb Rowan," Sarah said quietly, appearing at Eliza's elbow. "Arrived last week. Hired on at the Morrison Ranch. He looks lost. He looks like he'd rather be anywhere else." Sarah smiled. "Thomas said he's a hard worker, quiet, doesn't drink or gamble, keeps to himself mostly." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah gave her a look. "Because you were staring, and because he's been staring too, when he thinks no one's watching." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was simply observing." "Of course you were." Sarah's smile turned knowing. "He's staying in the bunkhouse at Morrison's. Thomas mentioned he's been asking about getting some schooling. Can't read much beyond his own name, apparently." Before Eliza could respond, Sarah had drifted away, leaving her standing alone near the food table with that information sitting between her thoughts like a lit match near kindling. The evening wore on. Eliza helped clear dishes and watched children play tag in the torchlight. She made conversation and smiled and pretended everything was fine until her face hurt from the effort. She was preparing to leave when a quiet voice spoke behind her. "Miss Hartwell." She turned. Caleb Rowan stood a respectful distance away, his hat still in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. Up close, she could see the weathering on his face, lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind, a scar along his jaw that had healed white against tanned skin. He was older than she'd first thought. Early 30s, maybe? "Yes?" "Thomas Mitchell said you teach at the school." His voice was low, rough around the edges, like he didn't use it often. "Said you might be willing to teach reading to someone older than school age. You want to learn to read?" "Yes, ma'am. I can pay. Not much, but I can pay." Eliza studied him for a moment. There was no pity in his eyes, no careful distance, just direct inquiry and something that might have been hope, carefully guarded. It occurred to her that this man had no idea about her personal business. He'd been in town for a week, long enough to learn where to find work, but not long enough to absorb all the local gossip. To him, she was simply the school teacher, nothing more, nothing less. The relief of that was staggering. "I charge 25 cents per lesson," she heard herself say. 2 lessons per week, after school hours. We can meet at the schoolhouse." Something shifted in his expression, tension releasing maybe, or satisfaction at a task accomplished. "That's fair. When do we start?" "Wednesday evening, 6 o'clock. He nodded once, settled his hat on his head, and touched the brim in goodbye. "Thank you, Miss Hartwell." She watched him walk away, his stride easy and unhurried, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. Teaching a grown man to read was different from teaching children, more personal somehow, more intimate in its way. But the prospect of those lessons felt like something entirely hers, untouched by pity or gossip or careful distance, a pocket of normal in a life that had become anything but. Sarah materialized again at her elbow. "I saw that. You suggested it." "I did. And I'm teaching him to read, that's all." Sarah's smile suggested she heard more in those words than Eliza had intended, but she just linked her arm through Eliza's and steered her toward home. "Come on, it's cold, and I want tea, and I want to hear you stop pretending you're fine." They walked through the darkening streets, their breath misting in the cold air. In her small house, with tea steeping and the fire built up against the November chill, Eliza finally let herself feel the weight of the past few weeks. "I'm so tired," she admitted quietly. "Tired of the whispers and the pity and the way people look at me like I'm fragile now. Tired of being treated like I'm less than I was a month ago." "You're not less. Tell that to Mrs. Bradley, who wondered if I can still understand children now that I won't have any." Sarah's expression darkened. "She said that?" "She did. And she meant it kindly, which somehow makes it worse. People are idiots. People are practical. Out here, where every hand is needed, like Mrs. Pritchard said, a woman who can't have children is—" She stopped, unable to finish the thought. "Is what? Still a person? Still valuable? Still deserving of respect and kindness and a full life?" Sarah leaned forward. "Eliza, you're letting their narrow-mindedness define you. Don't. Please don't." "I'm trying not to, But it's hard when the whole town has decided my story is already written. Then write a different story. Teach that cowboy to read. Keep teaching your students. Keep living. Keep being exactly who you are." Sarah paused. "And maybe, just maybe, stop assuming every man in town thinks the way the gossips do." Eliza thought about Caleb Rowan's direct gaze, his lack of pity, the simple transaction of his request. He didn't know, did he, about me? Probably not. Probably. Thomas wouldn't have told him. It's not his business to share. So to him, you're just the school teacher. Nothing more, nothing less. That felt, Eliza searched for the word, freeing. Good. Hold on to that feeling. After Sarah left, Eliza sat in the quiet of her small house and let herself imagine Wednesday evening, a simple reading lesson. Nothing complicated, nothing fraught with expectation or pity. Just a teacher and a student working toward a practical goal. It was a small thing. But small things, she was learning, could matter enormously when your entire life felt like it was collapsing. Wednesday arrived faster than she expected. Eliza spent the afternoon after school preparing materials. A primer meant for older students, paper for practicing letters, a slate for demonstrations. She built up the fire in the schoolhouse stove against the evening cold and lit extra lamps to push back the early darkness. At precisely 6 o'clock, Caleb Rowan knocked on the schoolhouse door. "Come in," she called, and watched him enter, removing his hat and closing the door carefully behind him. "Miss Hartwell." He nodded in greeting. "Mr. Rowan, please, sit." She gestured to one of the larger student desks near her own table. "I thought we'd start by establishing what you already know. You said you can read your name?" "Yes, ma'am. And a few other words, signs mostly, danger, stop, things like that." She nodded, making notes. "Can you write your name?" "Slowly." "Show me." She handed him a piece of paper and a pencil and watched as he carefully formed the letters, Calebrowan. His handwriting was shaky but legible, the work of someone who'd taught himself through observation and practice rather than formal instruction. "That's good," she said honestly. "You have the basics. We can build on that." For the next hour, they worked through the alphabet, reviewing letters he knew and introducing ones that were less familiar. He was a quick study, she noticed. Focused, patient with himself, willing to try things multiple times until they clicked. He didn't make excuses or offer explanations for his lack of education. He simply worked. There was something restful about it. No pity, no careful distance, just the shared focus of teacher and student working toward a clear goal. "That's enough for tonight," she said finally. "Practice writing these letters before our next lesson. Try to form each one 10 times. He nodded, collecting the papers she'd given him. "Thank you, Miss Hartwell. This is—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I appreciate it. You're doing well. I'll see you Friday." After he left, Eliza sat for a moment in the quiet schoolhouse, feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks, useful, valuable in a way that had nothing to do with childbearing potential and everything to do with the skills she'd spent years developing. It was a small thing, but it mattered. The lessons continued through November into December. Twice a week, Caleb appeared at the schoolhouse at 6 o'clock exactly, removed his hat, and spent an hour working with focused determination on letters and sounds, and eventually simple words. He was a model student, prepared, attentive, willing to work. He practiced diligently between lessons, his handwriting improving from shaky to merely rough. By the third week, he could read simple sentences. By the fourth, he'd started bringing questions about words he'd seen during his work at the ranch. They didn't talk much beyond the lessons, but in the comfortable silence of their work together, Eliza began to relax. Here, in this contained space, she wasn't the tragic school teacher whose barrenness had become public knowledge. She was simply someone helping another person learn. It was enough. The Christmas program was approaching, and the children were excited, their usual restlessness amplified by anticipation. Eliza organized rehearsals, sewed costumes, and managed the chaos with practiced ease. For a few hours each day, she could lose herself in the familiar rhythm of teaching and forget about the whispers that still followed her through town. She was working with the younger children on their speaking parts when Caleb arrived for his Friday lesson. School had run late, and she'd forgotten to send word that she might not be free. "I apologize, Mr. Rowan," she said as she let him in. "The rehearsal went longer than expected. I can reschedule? It's all right." He glanced at the decorations the children had made, paper chains and cut-out snowflakes adorning the walls. "Christmas program?" "Yes, next week. The children are very excited." "I imagine so." He was still looking at the decorations, his expression thoughtful. "I never got to do things like that. School programs, I mean." "You didn't attend school?" "Not regularly. We moved around too much. My father—" He stopped, then seemed to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. It wasn't possible. There was a story there, she thought, something in the careful way he didn't explain. But she didn't press. "Well, you're learning now," she said simply. "That's what matters." Something shifted in his expression, gratitude maybe, or relief that she hadn't pushed for details. "Yes, ma'am. Should we get started?" They worked through the lesson, but Eliza found herself distracted by questions she couldn't ask. Why had his family moved around? What had his childhood been like? What had brought him to Silver Ridge, to a ranch job and reading lessons and careful silence about his past? She was curious, she realized, and not just as a teacher. That realization sat uncomfortably in her chest for the rest of the evening. The week before Christmas brought snow that transformed Silver Ridge into something from a storybook. White drifts softening the rough edges of false-fronted buildings, icicles hanging like crystal from eaves, the whole world muffled and clean. The children were nearly impossible to manage, their excitement over the upcoming program making them restless and giggly during lessons. Eliza didn't mind. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and planning the program gave her something to focus on beyond the careful politeness that still governed most of her interactions in town. The evening of the program, parents packed the schoolhouse until it was standing room only. The children performed beautifully, reciting poems, singing carols, presenting a short nativity scene with costumes Eliza had sewn from donated fabric. When it ended, the applause was genuine and warm, and for a moment Eliza felt almost normal again. "Miss Hartwell, that was wonderful," Mrs. Morrison said, catching her as parents collected their children. "You have such a gift with the children." "Thank you. They worked very hard." "They did indeed." Mrs. Morrison hesitated, then added, "I wanted to mention Caleb Rowan has been doing excellent work at our ranch. My husband is very pleased, and I understand you've been teaching him to read?" "I have. He's a dedicated student." "That's kind of you. He's a good man, quiet but reliable. We're fortunate to have him." Mrs. Morrison smiled. "I just thought you should know he's spoken very highly of your teaching." After she'd left, Eliza stood in the emptying schoolhouse, wondering at that small kindness. Mrs. Morrison hadn't needed to say anything, but she'd made the effort to acknowledge Caleb's praise, to connect them in a way that felt almost like approval. It was a small thing, but small things had started to matter more. The reading lessons continued through Christmas and into January. The days grew shorter, colder, the snow piling deeper in the streets. Silver Ridge settled into its winter rhythm, people venturing out only when necessary, social gatherings limited to church services, and the occasional barn dance. Caleb's reading improved steadily. By mid-January, he could work through simple books with minimal help, his rough hands turning pages carefully, his voice gaining confidence as he sounded out words. He'd started bringing a small notebook to lessons, writing down new words he encountered during the week. "What's inventory?" he asked one evening, showing her the notebook where he'd carefully copied the word. "It's a detailed list of items, usually used for business purposes, counting stock or supplies." "Like the ranch counts cattle?" "Exactly like that." He nodded, making a note. "Mr. Morrison asked me to help with the spring inventory. I told him I'm learning to read, and he said I could assist if I wanted." "That's excellent. Practical application will help reinforce what you're learning." "Yes, ma'am." He paused, then added quietly, "I never thought I'd be doing this kind of work. Reading, I mean. Writing things down. It feels different." "Different how?" "Like I'm not just surviving anymore, like I'm building something." He looked up from the notebook, meeting her eyes directly. "Thank you for that." The gratitude in his voice was raw, unguarded in a way that made something catch in Eliza's chest. "You're doing the work, Mr. Rowan. I'm simply providing guidance." Still, it matters. They held eye contact for a moment longer than necessary, and Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. She looked down at the primer on her desk, suddenly flustered. "We should continue," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Let's work on compound words." If he noticed her discomfort, he didn't acknowledge it. They finished the lesson in comfortable silence, and when he left, Eliza sat alone in the schoolhouse for a long time, wondering why that moment had affected her so deeply. February arrived with brutal cold and fierce winds that rattled windows and sent snow swirling through the streets in blinding sheets. The children arrived at school, bundled in layers, their cheeks red, their breath frosting in the air. Eliza kept the stove burning hot and moved lessons closer to its warmth. The reading lessons continued despite the weather. Caleb never missed a session, arriving at 6 o'clock exactly even when the wind made walking treacherous. His dedication impressed her. She'd had students abandon easier commitments for less difficult obstacles. "Aren't you cold?" she asked one particularly bitter evening when he arrived with snow crusted on his coat and ice in his hair. "Cold is relative, ma'am. I've been colder." "That doesn't sound like much of a life." He smiled slightly, brushing snow from his shoulders. "It was the life I had. This one's better." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. But she found herself curious about those hints of hardship, the careful way he never quite explained his past. They were working through a passage about westward expansion when he suddenly looked up from the book. "Miss Hartwell, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you teach?" He gestured at the schoolhouse around them. "I mean, really teach. Not just because it's a job, but the way you do it, like it matters more than just the lessons." The question caught her off guard. Because it does matter. Knowledge opens doors. It gives people choices they wouldn't have otherwise. She paused, trying to articulate something she'd never put into words before. It gives people the tools to build the lives they want, rather than just accepting the lives they're given. He studied her face for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "That's why you teach me, even though I'm not a child." "Yes. Your age doesn't make you less deserving of education. Some people would say I should have learned as a child, that it's too late now." "Some people are wrong." She met his gaze directly. "It's never too late to learn, Mr. Rowan. Never too late to build something different." Something shifted in his expression, recognition maybe, or understanding of something unspoken between them. "Thank you for believing that." After he left, Eliza sat in the quiet schoolhouse and acknowledged what she'd been avoiding for weeks. She looked forward to these lessons, not just because they were an escape from the town's careful distance, but because of him specifically. Because Caleb Rowan treated her like a person rather than a tragic figure. Because he listened when she talked and took her seriously and never, not once, looked at her with pity. Because she was starting to care what he thought of her. That realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like possibility. The thaw came in early March, turning snow to slush, and the streets to mud. The children grew restless again, eager for spring and the freedom it would bring. Eliza organized a spelling bee and a mathematics competition, trying to channel their energy into productive directions. Sarah noticed the change in her during their weekly tea. "You seem lighter," she observed, pouring hot water over tea leaves. "Less burdened." "Do I?" "You do. It's the cowboy, isn't it?" Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Eliza, we've been friends for 3 years. I can tell when something's changed." Sarah's smile was knowing but kind. "How are the reading lessons going?" "He's progressing well. He can read quite competently now." "I wasn't asking about his reading skills." Eliza looked down at her teacup, watching steam rise in delicate spirals. "He's different. He treats me normally. Like I'm just a person, not a problem to be solved or pitied." "Because he doesn't know?" "No, I think—" She paused, considering. "I think even if he knew, it wouldn't change how he sees me. He's not the kind of man who reduces people to single aspects." "You like him?" It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. "Yes, I do." "Which is foolish, because nothing can come of it." "Why not?" "Sarah, be realistic. What man wants a wife who can't give him children, especially out here where—" where narrow-minded people measure worth by reproduction? Sarah's voice sharpened. Stop doing their work for them, Eliza. Stop deciding what people will think before giving them the chance to think it. I'm being practical. You're being scared. There's a difference. Sarah leaned forward. Has he given you any indication that he sees you as less than you are? No, but he doesn't know. Then maybe tell him. Or don't. But stop assuming the worst before you have any evidence for it. After Sarah left, Eliza sat with those words, turning them over in her mind. Was she being practical or simply afraid? And if she was afraid, what exactly frightened her? Caleb's potential rejection, or the possibility that he might not reject her at all? The question haunted her through the following days. In late March, spring began asserting itself in earnest. The snow melted completely, revealing mud and dead grass and the promise of new growth. Birdsong returned to the morning air. The children grew almost impossible to contain indoors, their attention wandering to the windows and the world beyond. Eliza took them outside for lessons when she could, teaching botany through observation of budding trees and early wildflowers. The fresh air helped settle their restlessness, and she found herself energized by the change of seasons. Winter had been long and difficult. Spring felt like hope. The reading lessons had evolved beyond simple instruction. Caleb could read well now, his comprehension solid, his vocabulary expanding, but neither of them suggested ending the sessions. Instead, they'd started reading longer works together, adventure stories, historical accounts, even some poetry. Listen to this, Eliza said one evening, reading from a volume of Whitman. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. What does that mean? Caleb asked, leaning back in his chair. It's about interconnection, about recognizing our shared humanity, that we're not separate beings but part of a larger whole. He sounds confident. Whitman was many things, but modest wasn't one of them. She smiled. Do you like it? I'm not sure yet. It's different from the other things we've read. Poetry often is. It asks you to feel rather than just understand. He considered that, his expression thoughtful. Then I think I need more practice at feeling. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them acknowledged directly. Eliza closed the book carefully, suddenly aware of how small the space between them felt, how the lamplight made his features softer, less guarded. We should stop for tonight, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am. But neither of them moved immediately. They sat in that suspended moment, the schoolhouse quiet around them, something unspoken building in the silence. Finally, Caleb stood, collecting his hat. Miss Hartwell, would you— He stopped, seeming to reconsider. Never mind. What were you going to ask? It's not appropriate. Let me be the judge of that. He met her eyes, and she saw uncertainty there, carefully controlled. The town dance is this Saturday, for spring. I was going to ask if you'd attend with me, but I realized that might not be— Yes, he blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll attend the dance with you. Her heart was racing, but her voice came out steady. What time? I could call for you at 6? That would be fine. He nodded slowly, a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Then I'll see you Saturday, Miss Hartwell. After he left, Eliza sat in the empty schoolhouse, her hands trembling slightly, wonder and terror warring in her chest. She'd just agreed to attend a public event with Caleb Rowan. The whole town would see. The whispers would start again. And she'd done it anyway. Saturday arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm air. Eliza spent the afternoon in a state of nervous energy, changing her dress 3 times before finally settling on a blue cotton with small white flowers, simple but flattering, appropriate but not overly formal. Sarah stopped by just before 6 to find Eliza frantically repinning her hair. You look beautiful, Sarah said firmly. Stop fussing. I'm not fussing. You've repinned that same section 4 times. Sarah moved her hands away from her hair. Leave it. It's perfect. You're perfect. Now breathe. What if this is a mistake? What if it isn't? Sarah gripped her shoulders. Eliza, you deserve happiness. You deserve to be seen and valued. If he makes you feel that way, then this isn't a mistake. The knock came at precisely 6 o'clock. Eliza opened the door to find Caleb standing on her small porch, dressed in clean clothes, dark pants, a white shirt, a vest that looked new. He'd trimmed his hair and shaved, and he held his hat in his hands with the same careful respect he always showed. "Miss Hartwell." His eyes widened slightly as he took her in. "You look beautiful." "Thank you. You look very nice as well." They walked to the church where the dance was being held, their conversation quiet and careful. Eliza was intensely aware of the eyes that followed them, the whispers that started even before they reached the churchyard. "This doesn't bother you?" she asked as they approached the crowd. "People watching?" "Should it?" "They'll talk." "People always talk, ma'am." "Doesn't change what's true." Inside, the church had been transformed. Tables lined the walls, laden with food. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd. The same fiddle player from the Harvest Festival was tuning his instrument, and couples were already gathering on the cleared floor space. Eliza felt every glance, every moment of speculation. She held her head high and smiled and tried to look like this was perfectly normal, attending a dance with a man who'd only been in town a few months, a man most people barely knew. "Eliza!" Sarah appeared at her elbow, Thomas beside her. "You came. And Mr. Rowan, how nice to see you." "Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell." Caleb nodded politely. "Thomas works with Caleb at Morrison's," Sarah said brightly, as if Eliza didn't already know this. "Thomas, tell Eliza what Mr. Morrison said about Caleb's work." Thomas grinned, said he's the best hire he's made in 5 years. "Reliable, smart, doesn't need telling twice. Half the hands could take lessons from him." Caleb looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I just do my job." "You do it well," Thomas countered. "That counts for something." The fiddle player started a reel, and couples moved onto the floor. Sarah caught Eliza's eye, then deliberately steered Thomas away, leaving them alone in the crowd. "Would you like to dance?" Caleb asked quietly. Eliza's mouth went dry. Dancing meant his hand on her waist, meant being even more publicly connected. It meant committing to this, whatever this was, in front of everyone. "Yes," she said. "I would." His hand was warm and calloused when he took hers, his other hand settling carefully at her waist. They moved into the pattern of the dance, and Eliza found herself surprised by how well he moved. Not practiced or smooth, but natural, following the music with easy confidence. "I didn't know you could dance," she said. "I can't, really, but I can follow rhythm, and I'm good at not stepping on feet." She laughed, some of her tension releasing. "That's most of what dancing requires." They moved through the reel, then into a slower waltz. Other couples surrounded them, familiar faces, people she'd known for years. She saw Mrs. Pritchard watching with narrow speculation, saw Margaret Henderson whispering to her husband, saw the way attention kept drifting to them, assessing, judging. "Ignore them," Caleb said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Easier said than done." "Then focus on me instead." She looked up at him, met his steady gaze, and found she could do exactly that. The rest of the room faded to background noise. There was just the music, the warmth of his hand on her waist, the way he looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. They danced through 3 more songs before taking a break for refreshments. Sarah appeared again, pressing cups of punch into their hands, chattering about the music and the spring weather and anything except the obvious, that Eliza Hartwell was attending a dance with an eligible man, and the whole town was watching. "Having a good time?" Sarah asked pointedly. "Yes," Eliza said, and meant it. "I am." Later, when they stepped outside for air, Caleb leaned against the church wall and looked at her directly. "I should tell you something." Her stomach tightened. "All right?" "I know about what happened, about what the doctor said." The world tilted slightly. What?" "I overheard Mrs. Henderson and another woman talking at the general store a few weeks ago. They didn't know I was there." He pushed away from the wall, his expression serious. "I wanted you to know that I know, and that it doesn't change anything for me." Eliza couldn't breathe. All her careful distance, all her assumptions about why he treated her normally, they were based on him not knowing, and he'd known all along. "Why didn't you say something?" she managed. "Because it's your business, not mine." And because I didn't want you to think it mattered to me. He took a careful step closer. Miss Hartwell, Eliza, I asked you to this dance because I wanted to spend time with you, not because I don't know about your situation, in spite of it, if you want to think of it that way, or simply regardless of it, because what the doctor said doesn't define who you are. Most men wouldn't feel that way. Then most men are fools. The bluntness of it startled a laugh out of her. That's quite a statement. It's true. You're intelligent, kind, patient, dedicated to what you do. You make people around you better just by being who you are. Any man who can't see that because of something beyond your control is too stupid to deserve your time. Tears stung her eyes. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, maybe, but simple. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When she didn't move, he took her hand carefully. I like you, Eliza. I think you might like me too. Everything else, we can figure out if it matters. If? When, he corrected. When it matters, but not tonight. Tonight, I'd just like to dance with you some more, if you're willing. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, open, honest, waiting for her answer. Sarah's words echoed in her mind. Stop deciding what people will think before giving them the chance to think it. I'm willing, she whispered. His smile transformed his face, made him look younger, less guarded. Then let's go back inside before they start new rumors about what we're doing out here. She laughed, and it felt like freedom. They danced until late, until her feet ached and her cheeks hurt from smiling. Let people whisper, let them speculate. For the first time in months, Eliza felt like herself. Not diminished, not defined by lack, just alive and present and choosing joy despite everything. Caleb walked her home through the quiet streets, the spring air cool against her flushed skin. At her door, he released her hand with obvious reluctance. Thank you for tonight, he said quietly. Thank you for asking me. Can I see you again? Outside of lessons, I mean. Yes, I'd like that. He smiled, touched the brim of his hat, and walked away. Eliza stood on her porch and watched him go, feeling something she'd thought lost forever. Hope for a future that might look different than she'd imagined, but could still be full of possibility. Inside her small house, Eliza lit the lamps with trembling hands and sat at her kitchen table, replaying every moment of the evening. The dance, the conversation outside the church, the quiet revelation that he'd known all along and chosen her anyway, the simplicity of his words. Any man who can't see your worth is too stupid to deserve your time. She pressed her palms flat against the worn wood of the table, grounding herself in something solid while her entire understanding of her situation shifted. For months, she'd carried the weight of her diagnosis like a brand, believing it made her fundamentally less desirable, less worthy of love and partnership. She'd let the town's whispers shape her sense of self until she'd almost forgotten who she was beyond her inability to bear children. But Caleb hadn't done that. He'd seen her, really seen her, and decided she was worth pursuing regardless. The knock on her door came 20 minutes later. She opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch, arms crossed, expression equal parts amused and exasperated. Are you going to invite me in, or are we going to stand here while you look stunned? Eliza stepped aside and Sarah swept in, immediately moving to put the kettle on as if this were her own kitchen. I saw you leave with him. I saw the way you looked when you came back, and now I want to hear everything. There's not much to tell. Eliza Hartwell, you just attended a public dance with the most eligible bachelor in Silver Ridge, danced with him half the night, and left early with him. There is plenty to tell. Eliza sank into a chair. He knows, Sarah, about the diagnosis. He's known for weeks. Sarah paused in her tea preparations. And he said it doesn't matter, that any man who can't see past it is too stupid to deserve my time. The words sounded even more extraordinary spoken aloud in the quiet of her kitchen. Well, Sarah resumed her work, a smile playing at her lips. I like him even more now. How can he mean that? How can it truly not matter? Because he's not most men. Because he sees you as a complete person, not a collection of functions. Sarah brought 2 cups to the table and sat down across from Eliza. And because maybe, just maybe, he's someone who values partnership over biology, who wants a companion, not just a broodmare. Sarah, it's true. Too many men out here see marriage as a transaction. You give me children and domestic labor, I give you security and provision. Caleb clearly doesn't think that way. She reached across the table and gripped Eliza's hand. Let yourself believe it. Let yourself have this. After Sarah left, Eliza sat alone with her tea and tried to do exactly that. Let herself believe this could be real, could last, could become something that mattered. The following weeks unfolded with a kind of careful magic. Caleb continued the reading lessons, but now they extended beyond instruction into genuine conversation. He told her about his childhood in fragments, a father who drank, constant moving, work that started too young and lasted too long. She shared her own history, growing up in Boston, losing her parents to cholera, coming west with dreams of adventure and purpose. They took walks on Sunday afternoons when weather permitted, following the creek that ran along the edge of town, talking about everything and nothing. He had opinions about books they'd read together, observations about the ranch work, questions about her students and teaching methods. She found herself looking forward to these conversations with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. The town noticed, of course. The whispers shifted from pity to speculation. Was the school teacher actually courting the new ranch hand? Did he know about her condition? What could he possibly be thinking? Mrs. Pritchard cornered her after church one Sunday in late April. Miss Hartwell, I feel I should speak plainly. Please do. Eliza braced herself. This business with Mr. Rowan, I do hope you're being sensible. I'd hate to see you hurt when he realizes the practical difficulties of your situation. The practical difficulties of my situation are my own business, Mrs. Pritchard. Of course. I only meant, well, men have expectations, and when those expectations can't be met, then perhaps those men should examine their expectations rather than judge the women who don't meet them. Eliza kept her voice level, but something hard had entered it. If you'll excuse me. She walked away before Mrs. Pritchard could respond, her hand shaking with suppressed anger. How dare they? How dare they assume they knew what Caleb thought, what he wanted, what he could accept? That afternoon, during their walk, she told Caleb about the encounter. He listened in silence, his jaw tight. Do you want me to speak to her? He asked finally. No, she's not worth the effort. Eliza kicked at a loose stone on the path. But it's exhausting. The constant judgment, the assumptions about what you must be thinking or feeling, as if you're not capable of making your own decisions. People always assume they know better than you do about your own life. He stopped walking, turned to face her. But here's what I think they don't understand. I didn't come to Silver Ridge looking for a wife who'd give me 6 children and run a household while I worked the ranch. I came looking for work and stability and maybe, if I was lucky, some peace. What I found was someone who makes me want to be better than I thought I could be. Someone who sees potential in people others have written off. Someone worth building a life with, regardless of what that life looks like. You make it sound so simple, because it is. Either we want to be together or we don't. Either we're willing to face difficulties together or we're not. The rest is just noise from people who don't matter. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his certainty was enough to counter all the doubt the world kept throwing at them. But fear still lived in her chest, whispering that this couldn't last, that eventually he'd realize what he was giving up, that she'd wake up one day to find him gone. As if sensing her thoughts, Caleb reached out and took her hand. I'm not going anywhere, Eliza. Not unless you ask me to. I don't want you to go. Then I'm staying. They stood on the path beside the creek, the water running clear and cold beside them, the mountains rising sharp against the spring sky. It felt like a promise being made, quiet and solid and real. May brought warmer weather and longer days. The school year was winding down and Eliza began preparing for the final examinations and year-end program. The children were restless with anticipation of summer freedom, their attention wandering to the windows and the world beyond. Caleb had stopped attending the formal reading lessons, his skills now sufficient for his needs. But he found other reasons to visit, bringing her wildflowers he'd found while riding fence lines, helping repair the schoolhouse steps when they started to rot, walking her home in the evenings when he finished work early enough. They fell into a pattern of quiet domesticity that felt both comfortable and thrilling. He'd appear at her door some evenings with fish he'd caught or vegetables from the ranch garden, and she'd cook dinner while he read aloud from whatever book they were sharing. Afterward, they'd sit on her small porch and watch the sunset behind the mountains, talking or simply existing in companionable silence. It was during one of those quiet evenings in mid-May that everything changed. They were sitting on her porch steps, the day's warmth still radiating from the wood beneath them, when shouting erupted from the street. Eliza looked up to see 3 men stumbling out of the saloon 2 blocks down, rough-looking strangers, clearly drunk, clearly looking for trouble. "Stay here," Caleb said quietly, starting to rise. But the men had already spotted them. They lurched down the street, their movements uncoordinated but purposeful, and Eliza felt her stomach clench with recognition of danger. "Well, well," the tallest one slurred as they approached. "Look at this. Ain't you a pretty thing, sitting all alone with your gentleman friend?" "We don't want any trouble," Caleb said, his voice calm but with an edge Eliza had never heard before. He'd positioned himself between her and the men, his body language shifting into something alert and dangerous. "No trouble, no trouble," the second man said, grinning. "Just being friendly. Just wondering what a fine lady like that is doing with—" He squinted at Caleb. "You work Morrison's ranch, don't you? Just a hired hand. Seems like the lady should aim higher, if you ask me." "Nobody asked you," Caleb replied evenly. "Move along." The third man, shorter but broader than the others, stepped closer. "Don't think we will. Think maybe we'll stay and chat with the pretty schoolteacher. Heard some interesting things about her. Heard she's got a condition makes her, what's the word? Available. Since no decent man's gonna want damaged goods." The words hit like a physical blow. Eliza felt her face flush hot with shame and rage, but before she could respond, Caleb moved. He didn't strike, didn't shout. He simply placed himself more deliberately between her and the men, his stance shifting into something that spoke of violence held carefully in check. "You need to leave, now." "Or what?" The tall one laughed. "You gonna fight all 3 of us over some barren—" Caleb's fist caught him mid-word, a quick jab that sent the man staggering backward into his companions. The other 2 surged forward, and suddenly the porch became a chaos of movement, fists and grunts, and the solid impact of bodies colliding. Eliza scrambled back against her door, her heart pounding, unable to look away. Caleb fought with brutal efficiency, no wasted motion, no hesitation. He moved like someone who'd learned violence young and learned it well, blocking, striking, using his opponent's momentum against them. The fight lasted less than a minute. When it ended, all 3 men were on the ground, one clutching his face, one holding his ribs, the third simply sprawled in the dirt. Caleb stood over them, breathing hard but steady, his knuckles split and bleeding. "If I see any of you near her again," he said quietly, "this will seem gentle. Understand?" They scrambled away, muttering curses and threats. But they went. Caleb watched until they disappeared around a corner, then turned to Eliza. "Are you all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. The violence had been shocking, but what stunned her more was the absolute certainty with which he'd defended her. No hesitation, no calculation, just immediate, unhesitating protection. "Caleb, your hands—" "They're fine." He looked down at his bloody knuckles, as if just noticing them. "I should go. I don't want to—" "Come inside." She found her voice finally. "Let me clean those cuts." "Eliza, please, come inside." He followed her into the small house, and she directed him to sit at the kitchen table while she pumped water and found clean cloth. Her hands shook as she worked, reaction setting in now that the danger had passed. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly as she cleaned his knuckles. "Don't apologize. You were—" She paused, searching for words. "You were defending me." "Of course I was. I won't let anyone speak to you that way. I won't let anyone hurt you." The intensity in his voice made her look up, meeting his eyes across the small distance between them. What she saw there took her breath away. Not just anger at the insult, but something deeper, something that looked like fierce, protective love. "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Why do you care so much?" "Because I love you." He said it simply, as if it were obvious, as if there could be no other answer. "I've loved you since the first night I came for reading lessons, and you treated me like I was worth teaching. Since you looked at me and saw someone worth investing in, not just another ranch hand passing through. Since you started trusting me with pieces of yourself you don't show the rest of the world. Eliza's hand stilled on his. You love me. Yes. I know it's too soon. I know we haven't. I know I shouldn't have said it like this, but she leaned forward and kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate and perfect. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite their fresh injuries, and she tasted salt and copper and promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. I love you too, she whispered. I'm terrified, and I love you too. Terrified of what? That this can't last. That you'll change your mind, that I'm not enough. You're everything. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Eliza, listen to me. You are everything. Smart and strong and beautiful and kind. The fact that you can't have children doesn't diminish any of that. It doesn't make you less. It just makes our future look different than some people's. And I don't care about some people's futures. I only care about ours. What if you regret it someday? What if you wake up and realize what you've given up? I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing you. There's a difference. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'm choosing a life with someone who challenges me and sees me and makes every day better just by existing in it. That's not a sacrifice. That's the best decision I could possibly make. She kissed him again, slower this time, trying to pour all her gratitude and fear and hope into the contact. His arms came around her, solid and warm and real, and for the first time in months she felt truly safe. They sat together at her small kitchen table as the evening darkened into night, her hands holding his injured ones carefully, talking in quiet voices about futures and fears, and all the things they'd been too careful to say before. He told her about the ranch, about Mr. Morrison's offer to make him foreman when the current one retired next year, about the small house that came with the position, about wages that would support a family. A family doesn't have to mean children, he said carefully. It can mean you and me. It can mean a home we build together, work we both care about, a life that matters because we choose to make it matter. You've thought about this. Every day since the dance, every day since I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. The words settled into her chest, warm and solid and impossibly precious. I want that too. But Caleb, people will talk. They'll say terrible things. They'll judge you for choosing me. Let them talk. Let them judge. I don't care what strangers think about my life. He squeezed her hands gently. The only opinion that matters is yours. So tell me, do you want this? Want me? Want the life we could build together? She looked at him in the lamplight of her small kitchen, this quiet cowboy who'd walked into her life asking for reading lessons and ended up offering her everything she'd thought she'd lost. His face was bruised from the fight, his knuckles split from defending her honor, his eyes steady and certain as he waited for her answer. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want all of it. His smile transformed his face, made him look young and hopeful and entirely unguarded. Then that's what we'll have. He stayed until late, until it would be improper for him to stay any longer. At her door, he kissed her once more, soft and lingering, a promise of more to come. I'll see you tomorrow, he said against her lips. Tomorrow, she agreed. After he left, Eliza stood in her small house and felt the enormity of what had just happened settle over her. She'd been defended, declared loved, offered a future she'd thought impossible. The fear was still there. Old habits of thought didn't disappear overnight. But beneath the fear lay something stronger, hope, solid and real and growing. The next morning, Sarah arrived before Eliza had finished her breakfast, bursting through the door with her eyes alight with curiosity and concern. The whole town is talking about the fight last night. Are you all right? Is Caleb all right? What happened? Eliza told her everything, the drunk strangers, their cruel words, Caleb's immediate defense, and what had happened after. Sarah listened with growing satisfaction, nodding at key points as if Eliza were confirming things she'd already suspected. So he told you he loves you? Yes. And you told him you love him back? Yes. And you're going to be together regardless of what the town thinks? Yes. Saying it aloud made it feel more real, more possible. Sarah leaned back in her chair with a triumphant expression. Good. It's about time. I was getting tired of watching you both circle each other like nervous horses. We weren't that bad. You were exactly that bad, but you're not anymore, so I'll forgive you. Sarah's expression turned more serious. How do you feel? Terrified, happy, uncertain, hopeful, all of it at once. That sounds about right for falling in love. Sarah reached across the table and gripped her hand. I'm proud of you, for letting yourself have this, for not letting fear win. Fear hasn't lost yet. It's still there. It probably always will be, a little, but now you have something stronger to balance it with. They sat together in comfortable silence, drinking tea as morning light filled the small kitchen. Outside, Silver Ridge was waking up, stores opening, people moving through the streets, the ordinary rhythm of daily life continuing regardless of personal upheavals. Eliza finished her tea and stood, smoothing her skirts. I should get to the school. The children will be arriving soon. And Caleb? He said he'd see me today. I don't know when. He'll be there. Sarah's confidence was absolute. That man fought 3 strangers for you last night. He's not going to let a day pass without making sure you're all right. She was right. Caleb appeared at the schoolhouse during the lunch break, his knuckles bandaged and his face showing bruises that would darken over the next few days. The children noticed him immediately, their curiosity palpable. Mr. Rowan! Little Emma Carson ran up to him. What happened to your face? I had a disagreement with some men who forgot their manners, he said simply. Your teacher taught me that manners matter, so I reminded them. The children giggled, and Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. He was good with them, patient, honest at their level, unafraid of their questions. Did you win? Tommy Brennan asked with the bloodthirsty interest of an 8-year-old boy. The disagreement ended, which was all that mattered. Children, back to your lunches, Eliza interjected, and they scattered obediently. She turned to Caleb. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did. I needed to see you. Make sure you're all right after last night. I'm fine, better than fine. She glanced at the children who were watching with undisguised interest and lowered her voice. Thank you for everything. Nothing to thank me for. I'll always defend you, Eliza. Always stand between you and anything that tries to hurt you. He said it quietly, but with such absolute certainty that she felt tears prick her eyes. I know, I'm not used to that. You should be. You deserve to be protected and valued and loved exactly as you are. He touched her hand briefly, a quick press of fingers that the children probably couldn't see. I'll let you get back to teaching, but I'll see you tonight? Yes, tonight. He left and she turned back to find every child in the classroom watching her with varying degrees of speculation and delight. She cleared her throat, feeling her cheeks warm. Back to work, everyone. We have mathematics to review before the end-of-year examinations. But she couldn't quite suppress her smile as they bent over their slates, and when she caught Emma Carson grinning at her, she winked, earning a delighted giggle in response. That evening, Caleb arrived at her house with a small bouquet of wildflowers and a serious expression. She let him in, accepting the flowers with genuine pleasure. These are beautiful. Where did you find them? Up in the high meadow. Morrison sent me to check fence lines. He watched as she arranged them in a jar with water. Eliza, I need to tell you something. Her stomach clenched. All right. I spoke to Mr. Morrison today. Told him about us. About my intentions. Your intentions? To marry you. If you'll have me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring. Gold, unadorned, clearly old. This was my mother's. It's the only thing I have from her. I know it's not much. I know we haven't known each other long, but I also know I want to spend my life with you. I know I want to build a home with you, whatever that looks like. I know I want to wake up every morning with the privilege of choosing you all over again. Eliza stared at the ring, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Caleb, you don't have to answer now. I know this is sudden. I know you might need time to... Yes. He blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. The words came out steady despite the way her hands were shaking. Yes to all of it. To building a life together, to facing whatever comes, to choosing each other every day. Yes. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been waiting there all along. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing against her chest. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." "Well, I already know I did." They stood together in her small kitchen, the wildflowers bright on the table, the ring solid on her finger, and Eliza felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally beginning to mend. Not because Caleb had fixed her, she'd never been truly broken, but because he'd seen her completely, wounds and strength and everything between, and declared her worth choosing. That was what love looked like. Not rescue, not pity, just seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway. The news of their engagement spread through Silver Ridge like wildfire in dry grass. By the next morning, everyone knew that Caleb Rowan had proposed to the school teacher, and opinions formed faster than storm clouds on a summer afternoon. Eliza felt the weight of those opinions when she walked to the schoolhouse that morning, the ring hidden beneath her glove but burning against her skin like a brand. Women paused their conversations as she passed. Men tipped their hats with expressions that ranged from sympathy to confusion to outright disapproval. She held her head high and kept walking. Sarah was waiting at the schoolhouse, practically vibrating with excitement. "Show me," she demanded before Eliza had even closed the door. Eliza pulled off her glove, and Sarah grabbed her hand, examining the simple gold band with obvious delight. "It's perfect, simple and honest, just like him. When's the wedding?" "We haven't discussed that yet." "Well, discuss it soon, because I'm planning to throw you the best celebration this town has ever seen, whether they like it or not." "Sarah, you don't have to eat." "I absolutely do. You're my best friend, and you're marrying a good man who loves you, and we're going to celebrate that properly." Sarah's expression turned fierce. Anyone who has a problem with it can keep their opinions to themselves. The children arrived in their usual chaos of noise and energy, and Eliza threw herself into teaching, grateful for the distraction. But during the lunch break, Mrs. Bradley appeared at the schoolhouse door, her expression set in lines of concern. "Miss Hartwell, may I have a word?" Eliza stepped outside, bracing herself. "Of course. I heard about your engagement. To Mr. Rowan." Mrs. Bradley's tone suggested she'd heard about a funeral rather than a wedding. "I feel I must speak plainly." "I wish you wouldn't, but I suspect that won't stop you, Mrs. N." Bradley blinked at the directness but pressed on. "I only want to ensure you've thought this through. Marriage is difficult enough without complications. Does Mr. Rowan truly understand your situation, the impossibility of children?" "He understands perfectly. He has from the beginning. And he's willing to accept that? Truly? Or is he perhaps hoping that the doctor was mistaken, that miracles happen?" "Mrs. Bradley." Eliza's voice came out sharper than she intended. "My engagement is based on honest understanding between two adults who care for each other. What we've discussed, what we hope for, what we're building, that's between us. Not you, not the town, not anyone who thinks they have the right to judge decisions that aren't theirs to make. I'm only trying to help. Are you? Because it feels like you're trying to convince me I'm making a mistake, that I should refuse happiness because it doesn't look the way you think it should." Eliza stepped closer, her patience finally exhausted. "I'm marrying Caleb Rowan because he sees me as a complete person, not a collection of functions or failures. Because he values partnership and respect and genuine affection over societal expectations. If you can't understand that, then I pity you, but I won't let your narrow thinking diminish my joy." She turned and walked back into the schoolhouse, leaving Mrs. Bradley standing on the steps with her mouth slightly open. Inside, Eliza's hands were shaking with reaction, but she felt oddly triumphant. She'd defended herself, her choice, her future, and it felt powerful. That evening, Caleb arrived at her house looking troubled. She let him in, immediately sensing something was wrong. "What happened?" "Morrison pulled me aside today." He sat heavily at her kitchen table. "He's happy for us. Said he thinks you're the best thing that could happen to me. But he also warned me that some of the other ranchers are talking, saying I'm making a mistake. That I'm young enough to find someone who could give me children. That I'm throwing away my future." Eliza's stomach knotted. Are they making you doubt?" "No." He reached across the table and took her hand. "They're making me angry. Angry that people think they have any right to comment on our lives. Angry that they're reducing you to one thing you can't do instead of seeing everything you are. Angry that they think their opinions matter more than our happiness. I had a similar conversation with Mrs. Bradley today. What did you tell her? That our decisions are ours to make, and her judgment isn't welcome. A smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. How did she take that? Poorly. But honestly, I don't care anymore. Eliza squeezed his hand. I'm tired of apologizing for choosing happiness, tired of letting other people's fears and prejudices shape my life. If they can't understand why you'd want to marry me, that says more about them than about us. Exactly. He pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just above the ring. Let them talk. Let them judge. We'll build our life anyway. They decided on a June wedding, giving them just 3 weeks to prepare. Sarah took charge of the arrangements with military precision, enlisting Thomas and several of the more progressive women in town to help. The ceremony would be simple, held in the church with a small reception following. Nothing elaborate, nothing that invited more scrutiny than necessary. But as the date approached, the whispers grew louder. Eliza heard fragments of conversations that cut deeper than she wanted to admit. That poor man doesn't know what he's getting into. She's trapped him somehow. He'll regret it within a year. Give it time and he'll be looking elsewhere for what she can't provide. She tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the good. Sarah's enthusiasm, the children's excitement, Caleb's steady presence every evening. But doubt crept in during the quiet moments, whispering that maybe they were right, maybe she was being selfish, maybe she should release him before he realized what he was sacrificing. 3 days before the wedding, she finally broke. Caleb had come for dinner, and they were washing dishes together in comfortable silence when she suddenly set down the plate she was holding and turned to face him. Are you sure? The words burst out before she could stop them. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Because if you have any doubts, any reservations, now is the time to say so. I couldn't bear it if you regretted this later, if you woke up one day and realized what you'd given up for me. He dried his hand slowly, then took both of hers, his grip firm and warm. Eliza, look at me. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I am more certain of this than I've been of anything in my entire life. I'm not giving anything up. I'm gaining everything that matters, a partner who challenges me, who makes me better, who sees me for who I actually am. I'm gaining a home, not just a house, a future built on respect and affection and genuine care. That's not a sacrifice, that's winning. But children would be wonderful if they happened, but they're not the foundation of what I want. You are, us, together, building something that matters. That's the foundation. He cupped her face in his hands. Stop letting other people's words into your head. Stop giving them power over what we know is true. It's hard. When everyone isn't saying anything. A few small-minded people who don't matter are saying things. The people who actually matter, Sarah, Thomas, Morrison, the children you teach, they're happy for us. They understand. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. And even if they didn't, even if the whole town thought we were making a mistake, I'd still choose you, every single time. She kissed him then, desperate and grateful, trying to communicate everything she couldn't put into words. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. 3 more days. She whispered. 3 more days, and then you're stuck with me forever. Promise? Promise. The wedding day arrived with perfect June weather, clear skies, warm sun, a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers from the mountain meadows. Eliza dressed in her mother's wedding dress, which Sarah had helped her alter to fit. Simple white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, worn but beautiful. She pinned her dark hair up carefully, tucked a spray of wildflowers behind her ear, and looked at herself in the small mirror. She looked like a bride, not a tragic figure, not damaged goods, not a woman settling for less than she deserved, just a bride, about to marry a man she loved. Sarah knocked on the door, then entered without waiting for permission. Oh, Eliza, you're beautiful. I'm terrified. That's normal. But look at me. Are you terrified of marrying Caleb, or terrified of what people will think? Eliza considered that carefully. The second one. Then ignore the second one and focus on the first. Do you want to marry him? Yes, more than anything. Then that's all that matters. Now come on, before Thomas wears a hole in the church floor from pacing. The church was surprisingly full. Eliza had expected a sparse crowd. A few obligatory attendees, mostly people who felt they should witness the spectacle of the schoolteacher's unlikely marriage. Instead, she found the pews packed with faces she recognized. Her students and their families. The ranch hands from Morrison's, cleaned up and looking uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. Shopkeepers and their wives. Even Mrs. Henderson, who'd been one of the first to spread the gossip about her diagnosis, sat in the third row with an expression that might have been approval. And at the front, standing with the minister, Caleb waited. He wore a new suit, dark and simple, clearly purchased specifically for this occasion. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven, but his eyes held the same steady certainty that had drawn her to him from the beginning. The ceremony passed in a blur of words and promises. Eliza heard herself speak her vows, heard Caleb's voice rough with emotion as he spoke his. The ring, her mother's ring that now bore his promise, slid onto her finger beside his mother's band, and she felt the weight of both their histories joining together in that moment. You may kiss your bride. Caleb's kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promise. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, applause filled the church, genuine, warm, celebratory. Not the scattered, obligatory clapping of people going through motions, but real joy for their union. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables laden with food that various families had contributed. Eliza moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting congratulations, thanking people for coming, trying to process the fact that she was married, that the community had turned out to support them despite all the gossip and judgment. Miss Mrs. Rowan. Emma Carson appeared at her elbow, her face shining with excitement. You look like a princess. Thank you, Emma. Are you going to keep teaching, now that you're married? I am. Your education is too important to interrupt. Emma beamed, then ran off to join the other children who were playing tag between the tables. Eliza watched them go, feeling a swell of affection. These children, she'd taught them, challenged them, watched them grow. They were hers in a way that had nothing to do with biology, and everything to do with care and investment and love. You're thinking deep thoughts. Caleb appeared beside her, 2 cups of punch in his hands. He offered her one. Just realizing that family doesn't always look the way we expect it to. No, but that doesn't make it less real. He touched his cup to hers in a quiet toast. 2 unexpected families. 2 unexpected families, she echoed. The celebration continued into the evening. Someone brought out a fiddle, and dancing started on the cleared grass. Caleb led Eliza through a waltz, then a reel, then another waltz. Other couples joined them, and the churchyard filled with music and laughter and the simple joy of community coming together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Caleb leaned close and whispered, Should we escape? Can we? It seems rude to leave our own wedding reception. I think people will understand if the bride and groom want some time alone. They slipped away quietly, walking hand in hand toward the small house that came with Caleb's foreman position. Morrison had given it to them as a wedding gift, weeks earlier than originally promised, saying they deserved to start their marriage in their own home rather than in her cramped teacher's quarters. The house was modest but solid. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a sitting room with a stone fireplace. Sarah and Thomas had helped them move Eliza's few possessions in over the past week, and the place already felt like home. Her books-lined shelves Caleb had built. Her mother's quilt covered their bed. His few belongings mingled with hers in a way that felt natural, right. Inside, Caleb lit lamps while Eliza stood in the middle of the sitting room, still wearing her mother's wedding dress, feeling the enormity of the day settle over her. She was married. She was Mrs. Caleb Rowan. She had a husband, a home, a future that looked nothing like what she'd imagined a year ago, but somehow felt more real, more possible than any dream she'd had before. Eliza. Caleb's voice was soft. He stood in the lamplight, looking at her with such open love that her breath caught. Come here. She crossed the room, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, letting the reality of their marriage sink in. I love you, she whispered against his chest. I love you too, and I promise you, I will spend every day of our lives proving that you made the right choice. I already know I did. That night, in the quiet of their new home, they began building the life they'd promised each other. Not perfect, not without challenges, but theirs. Chosen deliberately, built with care, founded on respect and affection, and the simple revolutionary act of seeing each other completely and choosing each other anyway. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Eliza continued teaching. The school board had initially questioned whether a married woman should maintain her position, but Morrison's forceful advocacy and a petition signed by every parent whose child attended the school had settled the matter. She was too valuable to lose over outdated conventions. She'd walk to the schoolhouse each morning, teach her students with the same dedication she'd always shown, then return home to find Caleb there, or arrive shortly after with stories about ranch work and questions about her day. They cooked together, read together, talked late into the night about everything and nothing. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely extraordinary. The town gradually adjusted to their marriage. The whispers didn't stop entirely. There would always be people who viewed their union as a peculiar tragedy or a cautionary tale. But most people moved on to fresher gossip, and Eliza found she cared less about opinions that had never mattered in the first place. What mattered was the life she was building with Caleb. The way he listened when she talked about teaching challenges, the way she could make him laugh with observations about student antics, the way they developed their own language of glances and touches, communicating volumes without words. In July, during a heat wave that made everyone irritable, Eliza woke up feeling nauseated. She attributed it to the temperature, to something she'd eaten, to anything but the impossible. She'd been told in absolute terms that pregnancy wasn't possible. Dr. Whitmore had been certain, but the nausea persisted. And when she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she couldn't ignore the signs anymore. She sat at the kitchen table one afternoon while Caleb was working, a cup of tea cooling in front of her, trying to reconcile what her body was telling her with what she'd been told was impossible. Dr. Whitmore had said never. He'd said the scarring was too extensive, the damage too complete. But her body was saying something different. She was terrified to hope, terrified to believe, terrified that she was imagining symptoms because she wanted so desperately for the diagnosis to be wrong. When Caleb came home that evening, he found her still sitting at the table, the tea long cold, her expression distant. Eliza, what's wrong? I need to see the doctor. His face paled. Are you ill? Are you hurt? No, I don't think so. I need to see him. The next morning, they walked to Dr. Whitmore's office together. Eliza's heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy, and Caleb's hand gripped hers tightly, his concern palpable. Dr. Whitmore's examination was thorough and professional. He asked questions, performed tests, his expression neutral throughout. Finally, he sat back and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Miss Hart, Mrs. Rowan, I need to revise my previous diagnosis. The world tilted. What? You're pregnant, approximately 8 weeks along, I'd estimate. The words didn't make sense. Eliza stared at him, trying to process language that seemed to be coming from very far away. That's not possible. You said, I know what I said, and I was wrong. He had the grace to look chagrined. The scarring I observed, I believed it was complete, that conception was impossible. Clearly, I was mistaken. Sometimes the body surprises us. Sometimes what we think we know with certainty proves to be incorrect. I'm pregnant. She said it aloud, testing the words, still unable to quite believe them. You are. And from what I can determine, the pregnancy appears healthy. You'll need to be monitored carefully, given the previous damage, but there's no reason to think you can't carry to term. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room seemed to spin around her, and she felt Caleb's arm come around her shoulders, steadying her. Are you certain? Caleb's voice was rough. There's no mistake? I'm certain. Congratulations, Mr. Rowan. You're going to be a father. They walked home in silence, both too stunned to speak. Inside their house, Eliza sank into a chair and stared at her hands, still trying to process the impossible thing she'd just been told. A baby. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "We're having a baby." Caleb knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "How do you feel?" "I don't know. Shocked, terrified, happy, disbelieving, all of it at once." She looked up at him, tears starting to spill over. What if he was wrong again? What if I lose it? What if... Then we'll face that together. But right now, in this moment, you're carrying our child. That's not something I ever expected, but Eliza, it's a gift. An unexpected, impossible gift. You're not disappointed? He looked genuinely confused. Why would I be disappointed? Because I know you meant what you said, that you married me regardless of children, that you'd accepted that future. And now everything's different. Now you're getting something you said you didn't need. And I'm worried that... Stop. He cupped her face in his hands. Listen to me. I married you because I love you, because I wanted a life with you. A child is a joy I never expected, and I'm grateful for it. But it doesn't change why I married you, and it doesn't validate our marriage. Our marriage was already valid, already complete, already everything I wanted. This is just extra, unexpected extra. I spent so long believing I was less because I couldn't have children, and now you were never less. Never. This pregnancy doesn't make you more valuable, Eliza. You were always whole, always worthy, always enough. He pressed his forehead to hers. And now we get to be parents together, which is terrifying and wonderful, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know we'll figure it out. She laughed through tears, some of the shock beginning to give way to cautious, tentative joy. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, he confirmed, and his smile was so wide, so genuine, that she couldn't help but smile back. The news spread quickly, as news always did in Silver Ridge. Eliza braced herself for the reactions, the skepticism, the judgment, the suggestions that maybe the pregnancy wouldn't last, that she shouldn't get her hopes up. Instead, she found congratulations. Genuine, warm congratulations from most of the town. Mrs. Henderson brought over baby blankets she'd knitted. Sarah cried with joy and immediately started planning for the birth. Even Mrs. Pritchard, who'd been one of the most skeptical about the marriage, offered her best wishes with what seemed like genuine sincerity. Only Mrs. Bradley remained coolly distant, her expression suggesting she viewed the pregnancy as some kind of trick or deception. Eliza tried not to let it bother her, but one afternoon when she encountered Mrs. Bradley at the general store, the woman's comment cut deeper than expected. "Well, Mrs. Rowan, I hear congratulations are in order." "Thank you. Though I must say Dr. Whitmore's original diagnosis makes one wonder. Perhaps the condition was never as serious as claimed. Perhaps certain people exaggerated their situation for sympathy, attention." The implication hung in the air between them. That Eliza had lied, had manipulated, had used a false diagnosis to garner pity and snare a husband. Eliza felt rage rise hot and sharp in her chest. "Mrs. Bradley, I'm going to say this once, so please listen carefully. Dr. Whitmore examined me thoroughly and gave me a diagnosis based on medical evidence. That diagnosis was wrong, as he himself admitted. Medical science is not infallible. Doctors make mistakes. But I did not lie. I did not exaggerate. And I certainly didn't use my own pain and grief as some kind of manipulation tactic. The fact that you would suggest otherwise says far more about your character than mine." She left without waiting for a response, her hands shaking with anger. Outside, she found Caleb waiting with the wagon, his expression darkening as he took in her face. "What happened?" She told him, watching his jaw tighten with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Do you want me to speak to her?" "No, she's not worth it, but thank you for offering." He helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. As they headed home, he reached over and took her hand. "For what it's worth, I'm glad the doctor was wrong. Not because it validates anything or proves anything, but because I get to watch you be a mother. Because I get to build this part of our life together, too. But Eliza, even if he'd been right, even if this had never happened, I'd still be sitting here beside you, grateful for every day we have together. You understand that?" "I do. I think I'm finally starting to really understand that." The pregnancy progressed, and Eliza continued teaching until October when her condition made it difficult to manage the active children. The school board agreed to hire a temporary replacement until after the baby came, and Eliza spent her days preparing their home for the new arrival. Caleb built a cradle from wood he'd carefully selected and sanded smooth. Sarah organized a gathering where the women of the town brought gifts, tiny clothes, blankets, advice both useful and ridiculous. Even Mrs. Morrison came, bringing a beautiful quilt she'd made herself, each square embroidered with different wildflowers. "For the baby," she said simply. "Every child deserves to be welcomed." In December, on a night when snow fell soft and steady outside their windows, Eliza went into labor. Caleb rode through the storm to fetch Dr. Whitmore and Sarah, his face pale with fear. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Eliza thought she couldn't endure another contraction, couldn't push through another wave of pain. But Sarah held one hand and Caleb held the other, and Dr. Whitmore encouraged her with calm professionalism, and finally, a baby's cry pierced the night. "A girl!" Dr. Whitmore announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant on Eliza's chest. "A healthy baby girl!" Eliza looked down at the impossibility in her arms, red-faced, furious at being born, perfect. She had dark hair like Caleb's, and when she opened her eyes, they were deep blue like Eliza's own. "Hello," Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." Caleb leaned over them both, his own eyes wet, his hand gentle as he touched his daughter's tiny fist. "She's perfect. You're both perfect." They named her Grace because her existence felt like grace. Unearned, unexpected, freely given. The first weeks with Grace passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Eliza had read about motherhood, had helped birth babies, had cared for infants when their mothers needed assistance. But nothing had prepared her for the fierce, consuming devotion she felt for this tiny person who depended entirely on her. Caleb was a natural father, patient and gentle despite his own exhaustion. He'd walk the floor with Grace at 3 a.m, singing soft songs in his rough voice until she settled. He changed diapers without complaint, learned to swaddle her snugly the way the midwife had shown them, and looked at his daughter with such naked adoration that Eliza sometimes had to turn away from the intensity of it. "I never knew," he said one night, holding Grace while Eliza finally ate a proper meal. "I never knew you could love something this much, that it could feel this big." "I know what you mean. And I keep thinking, if the doctor had been right, we wouldn't have her. We'd still have each other, still have a good life. But we wouldn't have her." He looked up from Grace's sleeping face. "I'm grateful he was wrong. But Eliza, I need you to know, we would have been fine either way, happy either way. This is extra joy on top of a foundation that was already solid." She set down her fork and crossed to him, wrapping her arms around both her husband and daughter. "I know. I finally really know that." When Grace was 6 weeks old, Sarah came to visit and found Eliza feeding the baby in the rocking chair Caleb had made, her expression distant despite the infant in her arms. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, settling into a nearby chair. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect. That's almost the problem." "You're going to have to explain that." Eliza looked down at Grace, who was nursing contentedly, her tiny hand resting against Eliza's skin. "For so long, I defined myself by what I couldn't have. I built my entire identity around being the woman who couldn't bear children. I let that diagnosis reshape everything I thought about myself, about my worth, about my future. And now you're questioning who you are if you're not that person anymore." "Exactly." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "I have everything I thought was impossible. A husband who loves me, a child, a home. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful. But I'm also confused about who I am now, about what it means that I was so certain of something that turned out to be completely wrong." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think you're still exactly who you always were, a woman who faced hardship with dignity, who refused to let other people's judgment diminish her, who built a meaningful life even when she thought it would look different than she'd hoped. The pregnancy doesn't erase any of that. It just adds to it." "But what about all those months of grief, of learning to accept a future without children? Was that all wasted?" "Was it wasted, or did it teach you something essential about yourself, about what really matters?" Sarah leaned forward. "Eliza, you learned that you have worth beyond motherhood. that you're valuable as a person, not just as a vessel for creating life. That's not a lesson that gets erased because you ended up having a child. If anything, it makes you a better mother because you know your identity doesn't rest entirely on this little person. You know you're complete with or without her. The words settled into Eliza's chest, true and solid. I hadn't thought of it that way. Well, think of it that way. You're not losing yourself by becoming a mother. You're expanding who you already were. And that woman, the one who faced impossible grief and chose to keep living, keep teaching, keep opening her heart even when it hurt, she's still here. She's just holding a baby now, too. After Sarah left, Eliza sat in the quiet house with Grace sleeping in her arms and let herself really feel the truth of those words. She was still herself, still the woman who loved teaching, who read voraciously, who cared deeply about education and community and making space for people who'd been marginalized. Motherhood didn't erase any of that. It just added another dimension to who she'd always been. In February, when Grace was 2 months old, Eliza returned to teaching part-time. Sarah watched the baby during school hours, and Eliza would rush home at midday to nurse and spend time with her daughter before returning for afternoon lessons. It was exhausting, trying to balance both roles, but it also felt necessary. Teaching was still part of who she was, still mattered to her sense of purpose and identity. The children were delighted to have her back, clustering around her desk with stories about what they'd learned with the temporary teacher and questions about the baby. Emma Carson, now 9 years old, was particularly fascinated. Can I meet her? Can I hold her? Is she very small? She's quite small, yes. And when my husband brings her by later this week, you can meet her if you're very gentle. When Caleb did bring Grace to the schoolhouse during the lunch break, the children surrounded them with careful reverence. They'd all seen babies before. Most of them had younger siblings. But there was something special about their teacher's child, about being allowed to witness this part of Miss Hartwell's life that existed beyond the classroom. She's beautiful, Emma breathed, watching Grace sleep in Caleb's arms. She looks like you, Mrs. Rowan. She has her father's hair. But your eyes and your nose. Emma looked up at Eliza with sudden seriousness. Are you happy, being a mama? Very happy. Tired, but very happy. Good. You deserve to be happy. The simple declaration, delivered with such earnest conviction by a 9-year-old child, made Eliza's throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Emma. That's very kind of you to say. That spring, as Grace grew and became more alert and interactive, the Morrison Ranch expanded operations. Caleb was officially promoted to ranch foreman, a position that came with more responsibility and better wages. He threw himself into the work with characteristic dedication, improving operations, implementing new systems, earning the respect of every hand who worked under him. Their small house felt full of life now. Grace's coos and gurgles, Caleb's voice as he talked to his daughter about ranch business she couldn't possibly understand, Eliza's students sometimes stopping by with questions about assignments, or just to visit. It was chaotic and loud, and everything Eliza had once thought impossible. In May, Mrs. Bradley appeared at the schoolhouse after classes had dismissed, her expression stiff and uncomfortable. Mrs. Rowan, may I speak with you? Eliza braced herself, but gestured to a chair. Of course. Mrs. Bradley sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing, seeming to gather her thoughts. Finally, she looked up and met Eliza's eyes directly. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Whatever Eliza had expected, it wasn't that. Oh. I said terrible things, made assumptions about you, about your marriage, about your character. She paused, struggling with the words. I was jealous, I think, and frightened. Frightened of what? Of the possibility that I'd been wrong about everything I believed, about women's worth, about marriage, about what makes a life valuable. Mrs. Bradley's voice was quiet but steady. I have 5 children. My husband is a good man who provides well. By every measure society recognizes, I should be satisfied. But watching you build a life that didn't require marriage or motherhood to have meaning, watching you refuse to diminish yourself when others tried to define you by what you lacked, it made me question things I'd never questioned before. Eliza sat down slowly, trying to process this unexpected vulnerability. I don't understand. I've spent my entire life believing that motherhood was the only thing that gave women value, that without children, we were incomplete. And then you challenged that belief just by existing, by being obviously valuable and worthwhile, even when everyone thought you couldn't have children. It threatened everything I'd built my identity on. Mrs. Bradley looked down at her hands. So I tried to tear you down, tried to convince myself and everyone else that you were wrong, that you'd end up miserable, that your marriage was a mistake. Because if you could be happy without children, what did that say about the choices I'd made? Mrs. Bradley, let me finish, please. When you got pregnant, I told myself it proved you'd been lying all along, that your marriage was a deception, because that was easier than accepting that I'd been cruel to someone who was simply trying to live her life with dignity. She finally looked up again. But watching you this past year, teaching and mothering and being clearly fulfilled by both, I realized something. You weren't threatening my choices. You were showing me that there are multiple ways to build a meaningful life, that women can be valuable for 1,000 different reasons, not just one. Eliza felt unexpected compassion rise in her chest. It's not easy questioning beliefs we've held our whole lives. No, it's not. But you did it. When you were told you couldn't have children, you had to reimagine your entire future. You had to find worth in yourself beyond motherhood. That took extraordinary courage. Mrs. Bradley stood, her posture still stiff, but her expression earnest. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm sorry for the judgment and the cruel speculation. You deserved better, and I failed to give it. I accept your apology. Thank you for having the courage to offer it. After Mrs. Bradley left, Eliza sat in the quiet schoolhouse for a long time, thinking about how pain and fear could make people cruel, and how growth required facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Mrs. Bradley's apology didn't erase the hurt her words had caused, but it did something almost as important. It reminded Eliza that people could change, could recognize their own mistakes, could choose differently. That summer, Grace took her first steps in the backyard of their home while Eliza hung laundry and Caleb mended a bridle. She'd been pulling herself up on furniture for weeks, had been cruising along the edges of tables and chairs with increasing confidence. But those first independent steps, 3 wobbling paces from the porch to where her father sat before she fell into his arms, felt momentous. Did you see that? Caleb looked up at Eliza with wonder in his eyes. She walked! I saw. Eliza abandoned the laundry and joined them, sitting in the grass as Grace immediately tried again, determined to master this new skill. Our baby is walking. She's getting so big. There was something wistful in Caleb's voice. Seems like just yesterday we brought her home from the doctor's office. I know, time moves differently now, faster and slower at the same time. They sat together in the summer sun, watching their daughter explore the world with increasing confidence, and Eliza felt a contentment so complete it almost frightened her. This life they'd built, it was better than anything she'd imagined possible during those dark months after the diagnosis. In September, Eliza returned to full-time teaching. Grace was now walking confidently and babbling in complex strings of syllables that almost sounded like language. Sarah continued to watch her during school hours, and the arrangement worked beautifully. Grace adored Sarah, and Sarah's own children, now 7 and 9, doted on the toddler like she was their own sister. The new school year brought familiar rhythms, teaching children their letters and numbers, managing the chaos of young minds learning to focus and cooperate, watching understanding dawn on faces when difficult concepts finally clicked. Eliza had always loved teaching, but now she loved it differently. Now she understood viscerally what it meant to invest in the next generation, to shape young minds with patience and care and the conviction that every child deserved to be seen and valued. She'd learned that lesson herself, after all. Caleb had seen and valued her when everyone else had reduced her to a single limitation. And in being fully seen, she'd learned to see others the same way, as complete, complex people rather than collections of attributes or deficits. One October afternoon, she found Emma Carson lingering after school, her expression troubled. "What's wrong, Emma?" "Mrs. Rowan, can I ask you something? Something personal?" "Of course." Emma twisted her hands together, clearly struggling with how to phrase her question. When when people said mean things about you before you married Mr. Rowan, when they whispered about you not being able to have babies, how did you keep being brave? Eliza's heart clenched. Has someone been saying mean things about you, Emma? Not about me, about my mama. Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She's sick. Has been for months. And people whisper that maybe she's not really sick. Maybe she's just lazy or weak. And I hear them and I want to yell at them, but Mama says to ignore it, that their opinions don't matter. But it's hard. Eliza pulled out a chair and gestured for Emma to sit, then sat beside her. It is hard, probably one of the hardest things in the world, letting go of other people's judgments when those judgments hurt people we love. But your mother is right. Their opinions don't matter. What matters is the truth. And the truth is that you know your mother. You see her every day. You know she's truly sick, that she's not choosing to struggle. And that knowledge, that truth, is more powerful than any whisper. But how do you stop it from hurting? You don't, always. Sometimes it still hurts. But you make a choice. You can let their words define you and the people you love, or you can define yourself. You can let their limited understanding become your prison, or you can build a life based on truth instead of gossip. Eliza took Emma's hand gently. I know it's frightening when people judge unfairly, when they reduce complex situations to simple stories that fit their need to understand everything. But Emma, you're strong enough to hold on to truth even when others can't see it. I know you are. Emma nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Mrs. Rowan. Any time, Emma, and please tell your mother that if she needs anything, anything at all, she should let me know. We take care of each other in this community, even when some people forget that. After Emma left, Eliza sat in the empty schoolhouse and thought about how the pain she'd experienced had given her new capacity for compassion, new ability to recognize suffering in others. The diagnosis, the whispers, the months of grief and uncertainty, they'd all prepared her to offer this child the understanding she needed. Maybe that was grace too. Not just the unexpected joy of having grace, but the deeper grace of using pain to connect with and help others who were hurting. That winter was mild, the snow light and the temperatures moderate. Grace turned 2 in December, and they celebrated with a small party attended by Sarah's family, the Morrisons, and a handful of other close friends. Grace was delighted by the attention, by the cake Eliza had made, by the simple wooden horse Caleb had carved for her. She's so loved, Sarah observed, watching Grace play with her gifts while the adults talked. You've built something beautiful, Eliza. Both of you have. We got lucky. It wasn't luck. It was courage. Yours and Caleb's both. You chose each other despite everything working against you. You built a life based on what you valued, not what others expected. That's not luck. That's bravery. As spring of 1881 approached, Silver Ridge continued to grow and change. New families arrived. New businesses opened. The town was becoming more established, less rough-edged, though it maintained the frontier spirit that had drawn people here in the first place. Eliza's reputation had transformed completely. She was no longer the tragic schoolteacher whose barrenness had been public knowledge. She was Mrs. Rowan, respected teacher and mother, wife to the Morrison Ranch foreman, valued member of the community. People came to her for advice about education, about child rearing, about navigating difficult social situations. The change was so complete that sometimes Eliza almost forgot the pain of those early months after the diagnosis, almost forgot what it felt like to be defined by limitation rather than possibility. But then she'd see someone, usually a woman, sitting alone at church or walking through town with that particular expression of quiet devastation, and she'd remember. She'd make a point to reach out, to offer conversation, to let them know they were seen, because she understood now what she'd needed most during her own dark time. Not pity, not fixing, just the simple acknowledgement that she was still a complete person despite her pain, that her worth wasn't determined by her circumstances. In April, Dr. Whitmore stopped by the schoolhouse after classes. He looked older than Eliza remembered, his hair now fully silver, new lines around his eyes and mouth. Mrs. Rowan, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. What can I do for you? He sat down carefully, as if his joints pained him. I wanted to apologize. for my misdiagnosis, for the pain it caused you. Dr. Whitmore, you apologized when Grace was born. You don't need to. I do, though, because I've thought about it extensively over the past 2 years. I was so certain, so absolutely convinced that conception was impossible. I spoke with complete authority about something I didn't fully understand. And my certainty, my unwillingness to say, I don't know, or medicine has limits, caused you months of unnecessary suffering. Eliza sat down across from him, seeing the genuine regret in his expression. You believed you were telling me the truth. I believed I was infallible. There's a difference. He looked down at his weathered hands. I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. I've seen countless patients, delivered hundreds of babies, treated every injury and illness this town could produce. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that my experience meant I couldn't be wrong. That my diagnosis was gospel truth rather than educated guess based on limited information. You're human. Humans make mistakes. Yes, but our mistakes have consequences. My mistake cost you months of grief, damaged your standing in this community, nearly cost you the chance at marriage and family. That's not a small mistake, Mrs. Rowan. That's a failure that affected your entire life. Eliza was quiet for a moment, thinking about those dark months, about the pain and isolation and fear. But she was also thinking about what came after, the courage she'd found, the self-knowledge she'd gained, the way she'd learned to value herself beyond societal expectations. Dr. Whitmore, what you told me was devastating, and yes, it caused real harm, but it also taught me something essential about myself. It forced me to find worth beyond motherhood, to build identity on something more solid than the ability to bear children. And when Caleb proposed, I really knew, that he was choosing me for who I actually was, not for what I could provide. The diagnosis was wrong, but the growth it forced, that was real and valuable. You're being very generous. No, I'm being honest. Could I have learned those lessons without the pain? Maybe. But I didn't. I learned them through suffering and struggle, and as much as I wish it had been different, I can't regret the person I became through that process. Dr. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. You've given me a gift I didn't deserve. Forgiveness without reservation. Thank you. After he left, Eliza sat in the empty schoolhouse and thought about the strange mathematics of suffering, how pain could subtract from life while simultaneously adding depth and wisdom and capacity for compassion. She wouldn't choose the pain again if given the option, but she also couldn't quite wish it away, because doing so would erase too much of who she'd become. That summer, Caleb surprised her by coming home one afternoon with news that transformed their immediate future. Morrison is selling part of the ranch, he said, barely containing his excitement. 200 acres on the eastern boundary, including the house we're living in. He wants to focus operations on the main property, and he's offering it to me first. Eliza, we could own our own land, build our own future exactly how we want it. Can we afford it? With the wages I've saved and a loan from Morrison, yes, barely, but yes. We'd have to work hard, build slowly, but it would be ours. She looked at her husband's face, saw the hope and hunger there, and understood what he was really asking. Not just whether they could afford land, but whether she was willing to take this risk with him, to bet on their future together, to build something permanent and lasting. Yes, she said. Yes, let's do it. The paperwork was completed by September, and suddenly they were landowners, ranchers with 200 acres, a dozen cattle, and dreams bigger than their current means. Caleb continued working for Morrison while slowly building their own operation, and Eliza continued teaching, her salary providing steady income while they established themselves. It was exhausting. Between teaching, mothering Grace, now an energetic 3-year-old with opinions about everything, and helping with ranch work in every spare moment, Eliza fell into bed each night too tired to move. But it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from building something meaningful. In October of 1882, Eliza discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no disbelief, no terror that it couldn't be real, just quiet joy and the practical acknowledgement that they'd need to adjust their plans to account for another child. Grace was delighted by the prospect of becoming a big sister, though her understanding of what that actually meant was limited. Baby in your tummy? She'd ask, patting Eliza's still flat stomach with reverent curiosity. Yes, sweet girl, baby in my tummy. My baby? Our baby. You'll be the big sister. Grace beamed with pride at this important designation and spent the following months telling everyone who would listen about my baby. The second pregnancy was easier than the first. Eliza knew what to expect, felt more confident in her body's ability to carry and deliver a child. When Thomas arrived in March of 1883, healthy and squalling with indignation at being born, Grace immediately announced that he was hers and she would take care of him forever. You'll have to share him, Caleb said gently, holding his son with the same wonder he'd shown when Grace was born. But yes, you're his big sister. That's an important job. 2 children, a ranch they were building together, students she taught and cared for, a husband who loved her with steady, enduring devotion, a community that respected and valued her contribution. It was nothing like the life Eliza had imagined when she first came to Silver Ridge 5 years ago. And it was nothing like the future she'd tried to accept during those dark months after the diagnosis. It was better. Not because the diagnosis had been wrong, though she remained grateful for Grace and Thomas with every fiber of her being, but because the journey had taught her what truly mattered. She'd learned that worth came from character, not circumstances. That identity could be built on contribution and connection rather than biological function. That love meant being fully seen and choosing each other anyway. That community could be built on compassion rather than judgment. And she'd learned that sometimes the most profound grace came not from getting what you thought you needed, but from discovering you were already complete even when you thought yourself broken. 5 years after that terrible diagnosis, on a spring afternoon with both children playing in the yard while she hung laundry, Eliza caught sight of a young woman walking past their property. She recognized that particular quality of devastation in the woman's posture. Shoulders hunched, gaze downcast, moving through the world as if trying to make herself invisible. Without hesitation, Eliza called out, "Hello! Would you like some water? It's a warm day for walking." The woman looked up, startled, then approached cautiously. Up close, Eliza could see she was perhaps 22 or 23, with red-rimmed eyes and the careful blankness of someone trying to hold devastation at bay. "I'm Eliza Rowan," she said gently. "That's my daughter Grace and my son Thomas. What's your name?" "Catherine. Catherine Walsh. I'm new to town." "Welcome. What brings you to Silver Ridge?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I needed to leave where I was. Needed somewhere new. Somewhere people didn't know." She stopped, unable to finish. Eliza understood. She saw her own past written in this young woman's face. The shame, the grief, the sense of being fundamentally damaged. "Would you like to come inside? Have some tea? I promise no judgment, just conversation if you want it, or silence if you'd prefer that instead." Catherine's expression showed her confusion at this unexpected kindness, but she nodded and followed Eliza inside. Over tea, Catherine's story emerged in fragments. A diagnosis similar to Eliza's own, a broken engagement, a town that had reduced her to her barrenness and found her wanting. The desperate need to start over somewhere people didn't know her story. Eliza listened without interruption, remembering what it felt like to carry that particular pain. When Catherine finally fell silent, Eliza reached across the table and took her hand. "I know what you're feeling. 5 years ago, I received the same diagnosis. I know the grief, the shame, the way it feels like your entire future has been erased." Catherine stared at her. "But you have children. I saw them." "I do. The diagnosis was wrong. But Catherine, listen to me. Even if it hadn't been wrong, even if I'd never had Grace and Thomas, I would still have built a meaningful life. I would still have value as a person. You understand? Your worth isn't determined by your ability to bear children. It's determined by who you choose to be, how you treat people, what you contribute to the world around you. But no man will want. If a man reduces your value to your reproductive capacity, he's not worth having. I promise you that. The right person, if there is a right person for you, will see you as a complete human being with thoughts and dreams and worth that exists entirely independent of motherhood." Catherine's tears fell freely now. How do you keep going when everyone sees you as broken?" by refusing to see yourself that way, by building identity on something more solid than others' opinions, by finding purpose in contribution and connection rather than biological function. Eliza squeezed her hand. It's not easy. Some days it feels impossible. But Catherine, you're still here. You're still fighting to build a life worth living. That takes extraordinary courage. They talked for another hour, and when Catherine finally left, she looked less devastated than when she'd arrived. Still grieving, still uncertain, but with a spark of something that might become hope. Caleb came in from the barn to find Eliza standing at the window, watching Catherine walk back toward town. Who was that? Someone who needed to know she's not broken. Eliza turned to face her husband. Someone who needed to hear that her worth isn't determined by her ability to have children. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. Like you needed to hear it 5 years ago. Exactly like that. And if my pain means I can help others through theirs, if suffering I endured means I recognize it in someone else and can offer the compassion I needed, then maybe there was purpose in it after all. Caleb crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm just passing forward what was given to me. You saw me when others looked away. You valued me when others found me wanting. The least I can do is offer that same seeing, that same valuing to someone else who needs it. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Eliza and Caleb sat on their porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The same mountains that had witnessed her grief 5 years ago now stood witness to her contentment. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Caleb asked quietly. If the diagnosis had been right? If we hadn't had Grace and Thomas? Sometimes, but honestly, Caleb, I think we would have been fine. Happy, even. We'd built something solid before the pregnancy, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Children are a joy I'm grateful for every day, but they're not the foundation of what we have. You and me, our choice to build a life together, our commitment to seeing and valuing each other, that's the foundation. Everything else is built on top of it. I like to think you're right, but I'm also grateful I never had to test that theory. So am I. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. But knowing we would have been fine, knowing our worth to each other wasn't dependent on children, that made having them even better. Because I really know, that you're not with me because I gave you children. You're with me because you choose to be. Because we built something that matters entirely independent of biology. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. Inside, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the ranch they were building together stretched into the darkness. Land they owned, dreams they were manifesting through hard work and dedication. It wasn't the life Eliza had imagined when she first came to Silver Ridge. It was better, more complex, harder won, built on foundations of pain transformed into wisdom. And in the quiet of that spring evening, with her husband beside her and her children sleeping safely nearby, Eliza finally understood the full truth of what grace meant. Not the absence of suffering, not the granting of everything wished for, but the ability to transform pain into purpose, to build meaning from hardship, to choose love and hope even when circumstances suggested despair. She'd been told she would never have children, and that diagnosis had felt like the end of everything. Instead, it had become the beginning of a journey toward understanding what truly mattered, not the life others expected, but the life she and Caleb chose to build together. A life founded on being fully seen and fully valued, regardless of circumstances or limitations. The whispers that had once branded her as less than whole had faded completely, replaced by a new story. The story of a woman who'd faced impossible grief and chosen to keep living anyway. Who'd built identity on contribution rather than biology. Who'd found love with someone wise enough to see her worth when others couldn't. Who'd used her own pain to develop extraordinary capacity for compassion toward others facing similar struggles. It was a story of redemption and resilience. Of love that transcended societal expectations, of grace found in the most unexpected places, and it was only just beginning. Years would pass. Grace would grow into a thoughtful young woman who became a doctor, determined to provide better information to patients facing difficult diagnoses than her mother had received. Thomas would take over the ranch, expanding it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Eliza would continue teaching for another 30 years, shaping generations of students with patience and wisdom born from her own suffering. But the foundation for all of it was laid in those difficult months when she'd been forced to reimagine everything she thought she knew about worth and identity and purpose. When she'd learned that being fully seen, completely, honestly, without illusion or idealization, was the greatest gift one person could give another. And when she'd discovered that sometimes what felt like ending was actually transformation, that sometimes being told you'll never have something forces you to realize you were already complete without it. That was the real grace. Not the unexpected children, though she remained grateful for them always, but the deeper grace of learning who she truly was beneath all the expectations and assumptions. Of building a life that mattered not because it looked like everyone else's, but because it was authentically, courageously, completely hers. The echo of old whispers had been replaced by something far more powerful, the quiet certainty that came from being fully known and fully loved anyway. And in the end, that made all the difference.